Okay, we'll get started with our lesson on Chapter 5. It's Biology Chapter 5 on populations. It's Section 1 and 2. This section deals with population growth and some of the things that affect population growth and reading some of the charts. Population density. You have your PowerPoint for Chapter 5 that is uploaded, so you need to go through that and start making notes if you haven't. Also, there are some video quizzes, and you'll want to do those as they're assigned. So in looking at populations, if we take some of the information from our last unit of study, which was the biosphere, it talked about how you have lots of different species, the diversity, and where is life on Earth the most diverse is around the equator, tropical rainforest. You have a larger number of plants and animals. And why is it so diverse? Because you've got plenty of food. There's food that can be found year round, but it supports a lot of organisms in that area. In fact, if we look at a geographic distribution of organisms in North America, we see that Mexico has, and this is animal species, so Mexico has 439, the US 367, and then in Canada 163. And the further you go away from the equator, the more difficult the environmental conditions are, the less food. So you're not going to find the diversity that you do like in the tropical rainforest. So in this chapter, we're looking at some things that can affect the population growth, things like that can impact. Remember, we've talked about from the beginning, all living things want to do three things. They want to eat, they need to eat, they want to survive, and then reproduce. So we've got to have, have an ability to get food. An organism has to survive and performing whatever function it has in living, whether it's bees and pollinating or making honey, and then reproduce. So that function, those three are three vital functions to all that are common to all living things, whether it's plants or animals. So in looking at this, our chapter, I want to talk about the first couple of sections. 5.1 is talking about population density. So when we talk about population density, that's a number of organisms that is in an area. And then geographic population density can be influenced by a couple of things. So first of all, our chapter introduces this population study by talking about the sea otters. Sea otters along the coast of California, they had a rapid decline in population because hunters were hunting them. Fur traders were trapping them and hunting them for their fur. So there was a rapid decrease in the population because of the fur hunting. But then in 1911, they became protected. And so there were laws enacted to prevent the hunting of them for their fur. And so the population has started to increase. But here it was saying you could still have an environment. So that was human impact. You could still have something that was environmentally could endanger these animals and still would be a human impact. Here it talks about a large oil spill could wipe out that population. So several things can impact a population. And so that's what this chapter is going to look at. What are the causes? In North Carolina, there was a lionfish that was caught, and it was kind of surprising when some of your fishermen and things started seeing large populations or numbers of lionfish. And the reason that that's strange is if you look on this side, here in the green is a native range or area that organism lives. The native range for the lionfish is the Pacific Ocean. And so here, by your fishermen in their Carolinas finding them off the coast of North America, it was strained. And so how did they get there would be one thing that they would look at. And you could have currents that would, they would travel in the currents to these areas. But then also this graph or this diagram gives you an idea of what's the predictive future range for these fish. So you're thinking, well, one fish, what's the big deal? Well, this is a non-native species. So we'll talk about there's problems that can occur when you introduce a non-native species or of plants or animals, because then that species competes for the food and the space with the native organisms. And so sometimes it can even cause the native organisms to become extinct because they're better at getting food and better at getting the space. And looking at this, it was said that the lionfish, it is a predator fish, and it would eat at least 70 species of native fishes. So it would prey upon several different species of the native fish and really decrease those population numbers. So that would be a problem as far as we talked about one species of an organism going extinct in the tropical rainforest and how it wouldn't really maybe impact the food pyramid or the food web or food chain. But if you are affecting, if there's several fish, like 70 different species, those fish are going to be part of a food chain or a food web of other organisms. And so it would eventually, it would impact that area. And so that would be something, a negative impact that you would want to try to prevent from happening and protect that population of the native fish. When we look at different growths, so I've got several curves that we'll look at first. We'll look at the different charts and what they tell us. Let's see, let me go back to a couple of things that affect population besides the non-native species. Another thing that we're going to look at is, birth rate can increase a population. Also, immigration, which is organisms coming into a population, so that can increase the population. Things that decrease the population would be immigration, which is when organisms leave, and then also the death rate. So lots of things, and we look for causes of this. Sometimes organisms will immigrate because there's a large population and there's too much competition for food and space. So they will leave that population and look for somewhere where there's more food and better habitat. So keep those two things in mind. In looking at graphs, so it's important to know how to read some of the graphs and the information that's given on the graphs. This is a graph of the growth of aphids, or population of aphids. Aphids are little insects that feed off of the juices of plants. They really like the juices in the leaves, so they'll feed on the leaves, but then they also eat the sap. And so they can even do a lot of damage to plants. And so a lot of times we spray for those because they're a pest. But if we look at the growth of aphids, this area, wherever you see kind of a fairly straight line, this is described as a steady population. What that means is you have as many organisms dying as are being reproduced. And so you get this kind of steady state. And also what you see here is it may have reached a carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is when that's just the amount of food and resources that will support a population. But then around November, you've got this rapid increase in the population. So whenever you see a line like this, it's called an exponential growth. So it's a very rapid growth of the population. And then here we see the opposite happening. Population drastically decreases within a short period of time. So this rapid decline could be due to several things. It could be due to, lack of food, population, you could have run out of space, disease, could have been a natural disaster like if it 6 feet on trees, if you had a forest fire. But disease, in this chapter, I've had you look at a video clip about Black Death, and that describes the effect of a disease on a population of people. So in looking at this, we could probably, and then it goes back down to a steady population size, something that the environment can support. But what could be some of the other reasons for the rapid decline? So we may have to do some research into looking, where was this, this graph was of a population of aphids located in what geographic area. But more than likely, since it says December, what happens in December to plants? They go dormant, they lose their leaves, the sap goes down into the roots. And so that's going to greatly limit the food supply of the aphid population. And so that was probably the reason for this rapid decline in the population. But anyway, lots of things can go into that. But anytime you see things like this, it makes you question, what are the possibilities? What happened? What made those things cause those things to happen? If we look at other things can grow exponentially too. The book talks about bacteria is one of the best examples for exponential growth. Here it is a graph, and it starts off slow. So let's say you had one bacteria. Bacteria reproduce asexually by binary fission. So here it describes a type of bacteria. They have different binary fission rates. Some do within a couple of minutes and some even faster. But this one, it describes that it reproduces new cells every 20 minutes. So if we look at the graph here, if you start with one bacteria in 20 minutes, you have 2, and then in 40 minutes, you have 4. So it's doubling every 20 minutes. At the end of one day, you would get 4,720 quintillion. And a quintillion is a 1 with 18 zeros. So large number. So that's bacteria you pretty much always use for exponential growth, or examples of exponential growth, because as long as they have food and space, they grow really fast. So the only way you can slow bacteria growth down is to remove the food or change the temperature, because they usually grow at the optimal temperature is the best temperature at which they can grow. So can other organisms grow exponentially? If you look at elephants, so I've got a little question that I'm going to ask you. It's for a buzz question, so I'll be sending that out to you for some information, but it's about elephant population. So would it be possible for elephants to the population to grow exponentially? Well, again, you have to have an ideal condition. So what limits population of elephants now? Maybe the food, not necessarily the space, because Africa and is pretty large, and even Asia. But then hunting. So they've been poached for their ivory. So you would have to take away the predator, which is man, and other animals. So if you had ideal conditions, you have plenty of food, plenty of space, no predators, then they could possibly grow exponentially. But how long would it take? So you have to consider in there then the birth rate. And then also there was no disease or illness. So you're not going to have them dying very quickly. Um, so with the gestation period of an elephant, it takes about 23 months, almost 2 years for a baby to develop. And then that baby has to get old enough to where it is sexually mature enough to reproduce. So if you consider all those factors and you start with a couple of elephants, and how long would it take for them to grow exponentially? So at 250 years, you have probably about 500,000, something like that. If you continue the growth until 500 years, then you've got maybe your first million in your population. So at what point does the exponential growth, start for the elephants? Exponential growth, you're going to get a really, I don't know if this would be a peak or if it would continue depending on the food and the resources. But if we back up, here's about half of that's about 625. So right here, you really start, you go from your kind of steady state to you start this exponential increase around maybe 600 years. So it's taken 600 years before it starts on that upward exponential growth. And again, that's if you had ideal conditions, and that's not always present in a population, but that would be the predictor. If you're going to take the bonus quiz for this, it'll be a question about this, and your secret word to access that is elephant. So keep that in mind. The last thing that I want to talk about is the growth curves of logistic growth. So, and this one has a couple things occurring in it. You have the moose and the wolf population. The wolf is a predator. So here you would kind of consider this a steady state because it's, you've got kind of a large wolf population, but they're keeping each other in check. Like the wolf population is feeding on the moose, but then if the moose population is small, it's going to keep the population of wolves small too. But here you had a decrease in the wolf population. That could have been due to maybe disease. So if you see a small decrease in a population, there could be some environmental factors that happen there with either disease, or maybe it was the climate or the temperature or something. Excuse me. But then when you saw a decrease in the predator, then the prey population increased. And so we would see this increase, and then all of a sudden your predator population kind of recovers. And because there's a lot of food source, then, your predator population has got plenty of food, plenty of space. And so it's going to, the population numbers are really going to increase rapidly because this is almost ideal conditions. So it increases up to a point, and then when you decrease the amount of food that sustains that population, then you're going to see the population numbers come down. But then here, even when they're down here, the moose population still declines. So, and the wolves may prey on other things for food. But in the 1980s, you see this rapid decline of the wolf population. So what could have caused that? You think disease, but usually disease isn't quite as dramatic unless it's a really bad thing that just wipes out a lot. More than likely what happened is you had some human involvement in that. They came in, made a protected area for the moose so that they were safer. They may have even trapped the wolves so that you could decrease the population really quickly, And they did that in order to help the moose population recover. And so when you eliminate a lot of the predators, it does take a little while for that population to recover. But if it's protected long enough, here it was a 5-year period about, and then you start to see an increase of the moose population. So with this increase, you should have probably seen a little bit of a turn up in the wolf population, but you didn't. And so, we could maybe hypothesize that there was still some hunting and trapping going on to help to preserve and protect that population of moose, and that so that it could really increase in number. And then you have a little drastic decrease. Now, what could have happened there is, your population's kind of outgrowing its area. It's kind of reaching its carrying capacity. So it's interfering with maybe human activity. And so they may have allowed hunting seasons. And that's what we do to control the deer population, is you have hunting seasons so that it keeps the population from getting too large. And then, so that may have been what happened here. Since you didn't have the wolves, probably weren't a factor in the decrease in this population, we have to think it's probably something else. And then in the next 5 years, you have a large increase, and then this drastic decrease. So they may have started letting the wolves, not trapping those as many because you've got this large moose population, and you're going to kind of let nature take its course by allowing them to, the predator-prey relationship to start up again. But here you have a large decrease, and again, that could be due to several factors. It could be because the wolf population was increasing, as well as maybe hunting from by humans, and so a couple of different things could have happened there. So when you're looking at this chapter and looking at graphs, consider when you see the graphs, what's going on. There could be your logistic growth is when you've got as many dying as are being born. You've reached a carrying capacity, so there's not a lot of changes in logistic growth. When you have a large populations, several things can impact a population of large numbers. Competition, because if you have a large number, it's just like when it snows or any kind of major problem, there's a run on toilet paper and milk. And so there's lots of people wanting that, then it's going to decrease the number. So if you have a large population, now if the population's small, these things really won't factor in very much. They will impact the population, but not substantially. But if you have a large population, competition for food and space, predation, if you've got predators and prey, if you've got a non-native species, that can really impact the population in this. Parasitism, that would be things like disease, bacteria, viruses, parasitic worms, anything that weakens the host. And so if you have a weakened host, then those organisms are going to die. Another thing, crowding and stress. So crowding and stress will impact the population. Crowding, again, because of the competition and there's less resources. But stress will lower the birth rate of animals, and it will increase the death rate of animals, all species, even humans. And so stress in lowering, it lowers our immunity, which increases the death rate. So look at, if you have it in the PowerPoint, the slide 18, number 18, there's a video clip, and it will take you to a video about Black Death and how it impacted human populations. There's a couple of video questions about that that you should do and submit. But anyway, next time we'll talk about human populations and demographics and some population pyramids involving the study of human populations. So until next time, I will stay well and healthy and do a little bit of biology while you're at it.